You're listening to Passing Time, a Detroit Lions podcast. We're one pride and all grit, with a passion for Detroit Lions football. Whether you're between meetings, between classes, sitting in traffic, or just relaxing at home, if you have time to pass, pass it with Passing Time. Detroit Lions Talk.
Welcome back, everybody. Thanks for making our podcast one of your weekly listens. This is Passing Time. I'm Rob.
I'm Brian.
And this is Chris.
I'm Chris.
And you're on the clock. And thanks for passing time with us. A Detroit Lions podcast. Let's get after it. This is episode 48, season 2, episode 11. This is our pre-draft podcast. What we're going to do is we're going to diagnose the Brad Holmes interview. Right, Brian?
Yes. Chris?
Yep.
We're going to talk a lot about the draft. One of the things we're going to do is we're going to kind of break down a mock draft a little bit. We're going to talk about some of the rooting interests, right? Like people that we want to fall to the Detroit Lions. Also, position groups and players that we want to get taken up above the Detroit Lions. So it gives us opportunity for, potential more variety in the edge market, more variety in the O-tackle market, potentially the safety market. There's a lot of different options down there, and we're going to give you a little bit of those rooting interests. And Brian, we're going to break down some round 2 draft prospects because we're psychopaths and we like to dig that deep.
We want to figure out what the Lions are going to do in round 1 or round 2. So
before we do, we're selfish and we want you to know that we love you, we appreciate you, and the way to show us that love, Brian, is to click that little like button, to click that subscribe button, to tell your grandma, like, hey, I know you don't use YouTube, I'm going to make you an account. I'm going to sign you up. I'm going to put you on one podcast. It's going to be our podcast to increase our numbers a little bit.
Yep. Help us out.
Help us out. That's all we're asking. Help us out. Share, like, fake like. I don't even care. Just like put the pen to the metal here. Let's go. All right. So segment 1, we're going to talk about the Brad Holmes interview, pre-draft interview. And we're going to talk a little bit about the message that he delivered. Was there a hidden message? And is Brad Holmes putting salt in his water? And is he a little extra salty these days around the draft, Brian?
And something that we kind of were talking about pre-pod here was whether Brad is starting to become a little bit more reflective of himself and the maybe less of stellar job that he's done in the last couple of years, and the fact that he's got to get it right this year.
Does he have to get it right this year?
I think he does. I think that right now the Lions are still struggling because of the 2024 draft. I think the 2025 draft was better, but ultimately the 2024 draft is still up in the air, and we're still kind of, spinning our wheels to see is Terrion Arnold going to be a guy? Is Ennis Rakestraw really a football player? The guys that are on that list haven't really produced, so we need to make sure we hit in 2026.
It's tough because Brad set a very high bar. He came out firing on all cylinders, and I don't think that's attainable each and every year, right? Also, you don't want 2024 to be the new standard, and 2025 is still a little bit to be determined.
Sure.
Right? But it does look nice. You got, your first 2 picks, guys that like potentially could be 4 or 5 year starters on their first contract, which would be huge. Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit about Brad's message in his latest interview, Brian.
Well, I mean, he went anywhere from, thinking that Larry Borum and DJ Wonnum are starting caliber players and that we do not need to supplement in the draft for the edge or the offensive tackle, which could be draft speak. It could be general manager speak. It could be the fact that, yes, in fact, these guys have started before. But ultimately, are we going to target the edge or offensive tackle in those first couple rounds of the 2026 draft?
So to me, this is a little bit rich, right? Like, because I think you hit a little bit of that cryptic talk, but like, let's break it down on both sides of the ledger. On player speak, are they starting caliber players in your opinion?
I think that we can get by, right? We can get by with guys like DJ Wonnum across from Hutch. I think Chris, I mean, you talked to this a little bit, that he is a step up from a Davenport. In Madden speak, we talked about how DJ Wonnum is like a 75 and Davenport's more like a 60 in their ratings overall. So can we still upgrade from that? Absolutely. But is that better than what we had? Yeah, I think we are going into a season where we're a little bit more excited about a rush edge across from Hutch than we were the year before. Now, is it as good as a Zadarius Smith? That's to be determined right now. So now, Larry Borum, on the other hand, I don't think that's a guy that you want to rely on long term, but we only signed him for a 1-year deal, and he's a guy that has had starting reps. So is he going to be a guy that can fill a gap if we draft a guy until he gets ready? Yes.
So one thing that the Lions do have is a little bit more depth coming in this year, right? Like, there are more options in the interior behind Mahogany, who's right now the de facto other guard. And they don't have a ton of tackle depth right now. Borum is, as the roster stands, is going to have to be a guy, right?
He's going to have to be a guy. And I guess the question is do you want him to be the guy?
And Brad said in previous interviews he's very comfortable with him at right tackle.
But does he have to say that?
So here's the other side of the ledger, right? The Lions are going in this draft, and they want to be good poker players, right? Like, they don't want a team to snipe, the 16th pick to take out offensive tackle that they potentially might want to draft. So they have to look like they feel really good about their roster. And other GMs probably are reading into this a little bit, knowing that it's GM speak and it's coach speak a little bit. So could it be a little bit of both? Is it one more than the other, or where do we fall on this? I mean, do we think that this is more GM speak, or do we think that, like, hey, we might actually be okay to go into this draft as best player available no matter what?
I mean, that Brad Holmes is going to go into this with best player available on his mind. He's going to go in, he's wanting football players, he wants guys with grit, he wants guys with character, and he wants guys that love the game. And he doesn't care if they're position of value or not. He's going to find his guys, and he's going to go after them. And whether that's a safety or a linebacker or a running back or an offensive tackle or an edge, he's going to get his guys, right? And I think what Larry Borum and DJ Wonnum do is it allows you to be even that much more flexible with that. So it still gives you that versatility to go after your guy in those first 2 rounds. It doesn't pigeonhole you into, I have to have a need and I'm going to force this need. And he said that in his interview too, that it's awesome when the stars align, right? When a position of need matches up to the best player available. And I ultimately think that there's lots of guys, maybe not lots of guys, but enough guys in that first round that fit the need of the Lions that still fit also that best player available. And what that looks like could be still offensive tackle. It still could be edge. But we talked about it a little bit last week or a couple weeks ago. It could be a Caleb Downs. It could be a Sonny Styles. It could be that linebacker, safety, corner, and some of those positions too that we see kind of driving up the board a little bit. So
if something falls, if a Sonny Styles falls in that striking range, I mean that's very interesting, and I think that's the potential of the Lions. That they're going to go up and they're going to strike, and they're going to strike hard to get their guy. This could be a draft where things fall to them. Or this could be a draft where they, for the first time in a while, as Brad's looking at himself in the mirror, he could say, maybe I'm a guy that wants to trade back because I have a couple really, he talked about this in his, let's segue to his talk about free agency approach. But if the gap is just this much between this guy, and they're going to get paid this and this in free agency, the draft is the same way sometimes. If the Lions are sitting there and Amon-Ra Freeland's sitting there and Spencer Fanu's sitting there and Vega's sitting there, and they're all sitting there at 17, the Lions could say, you know what? Like, it's a pretty close quarters here. Let's go back and let's get a back end second round or a couple of third rounders to trade back and get one of these key pieces.
And that's what, like, let's be honest, we're all dreaming for the move back, gain picks, get those three first round or three. Those first 3 rounds where guys are going to contribute this year and make the Detroit Lions a better team, but then you also have that dream of like, hey, let's go get that top 10 guy that's going to change the game for the Detroit Lions and really push us over the edge. So, and
it's a bit of it's all lotto tickets, right? And like, but they have more information than we have, right? So they've seen the first few digits on every lotto ticket. We're still seeing the full scratch off over here. And if they have good information to move up, like, you got to trust your GM. You got to trust that they're going to make that move, especially his track record in the first couple rounds,
right?
The first round in particular. What did Brad say in his last interview kind of about like the free agency and kind of where we're at? And we're going to get more into the draft, and that's where we're going to spend the majority of the time. But let's kind of finish out that Brad Holmes interview.
Sure. He continued to talk about like having those constraints financially and having to go into that, finding guys that were high upside, 1-year deals, financially responsible, that we're still able to come in and pay our guys, or at least have flexibility to pay our guys, moving forward. So in the free agency, he made it known that we're not done, that we're continuing to look to get better. We're continuing to look to add. We're continuing to look to tweak. And I think that's a way that GMs have to always look at that. And Brad Holmes, to his credit, has done that throughout the season. It doesn't, like, free agency for him does not stop once the draft hits. It doesn't stop after the draft. You look at UDFAs, and I was talking to Bill today, and he's like, hey, do you know how many UDFAs we have on the 69-man roster that we have right now? I was very surprised to know that was like 25-ish guys that are UDFAs that are currently on our roster. So that surprised me. I mean, these are stuff that we're constantly looking at. We're constantly adding, finding guys that might contribute, whether that's practice squad, whether that's special teams, or somebody that's going to push for a starting position. So,
yeah, it's interesting the way he talks about it. I'll go into an analogy here, and this wasn't a personal family example, but what it kind of feels like. I grew up in a divorced parent household, and we were poor, and it kind of feels like my dad married a rich woman, and she comes in and it was like, well, you know what? Like, now you have rich people problems. You've had poor people problems your whole life, family. Now I come in here and you're kind of crying about a lot of things, but like, you got your Nintendo 64, you got a big TV on the wall, and now your dad and I fight about this and that, but like, hey, you're lucky to be in this situation because I put you in this situation. And that's what Brad feels like. He's like, hey, you guys were the old Lions, and that sucked. I've dragged you guys to this situation. Now we have new situations to go through because we have rich people problems about organically retaining our players through the cap constraints of the NFL.
But rich people problems, I mean, we want to be there, right? We want to compete. We don't want to continue to year after year fall into the same old Lion realm, or the where the draft is our Super Bowl. We no longer want to live in that life. We want to take that next step in order to compete. And we don't care about winning the offseason. We care about winning the regular season and in the postseason and then beyond, right? So that's where I think that Brad Holmes is yet to have proven himself. He's proven himself in the draft. Let's give him that credit. He's proven himself in undrafted free agents. He's proven himself that he can make certain moves. But has he proven himself to take us to that next step to compete for that Super Bowl?
And he's proven that he goes out and gets like a cultural fit. We rarely ever see a guy that comes to the Lions that is like really outside of the Lions culture.
And that's where you look at some of these guys in the draft, and this is the time that the smoke starts to billow out of the building, right? Where that guys that have anything on their track record, it comes out because you want to see those guys fall, or you want to avoid somebody else from picking them. And I go back to the Jalen Carters of the world, who character-wise was questionable, but when it looked like him as a football player, dude, I wanted him on my team, right? So you go back to, are we going to pick a guy like that to be on the Lions? And you've heard statements from Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes before, who's like, you can have one, you might be able to have two guys in your locker room like that, but you can't have a locker room like that.
That's tough, and I'll give you another analogy here. Like, you got this beautiful woman, but she's crazy. Yeah, you want to, like, get out of your car at the restaurant with this beautiful woman, but, like, you don't want her to talk. You don't want her to, like, act out. You just want to, like, usher her to her table, have her be quiet, and have everybody see you with this beautiful woman, right? Like, and that's a little bit like...
Have you ever seen the
Hot
series,
Crazy?
The Hot Crazy,
Yeah.
How I Met Your Mother, like Hot Crazy, the Matrix, just still makes me giggle.
I think Brad's trying to avoid the crazy.
Sure.
Right? Like he's gonna take NFL draft 7 looks wise, as long as they're on the 0 crazy spectrum versus taking a 10 with a 10, and some of those Georgia guys with their driving records, like it was just they were gonna avoid that. Speaking of situations, there's a Terry and Arnold situation that he talked about. Do you want to get into that a little bit? There's an Alex Anzalone situation that they kind of talked about. Right?
They've talked about both those things. It sounds like Alex is willing and more than wanting to speak his mind in regards to the outs as it goes from Detroit to Tampa, but that he still has a good relationship with guys on the team, and he still has nothing but great things to say about Dan Campbell, but that the front office had made a financial decision in order to move on from him, that Dan wanted him in the building, but financially they just couldn't make it work. So it is what it is. I think that's part of the business, right? And those are some decisions that GMs are going to have to make beyond what the head coach really wants, because we all want all of the good players. Like that makes sense. But financially, constraints, limit us from having all the good players. So, and the Terry on Arnold thing, and it sounds like nothing more has come to light, that they have a good understanding of what that looks like, that no charges have been brought against Terry Arnold, and as of now, he's still going to be CB 1 or 2. So
I feel like on the quarterback spot, as of now, we're sitting in a pretty good spot.
Okay.
Obviously, there's a lot of questions and marks with safety right now, with health and availability throughout the course of next season. That said, is there anything else left to be said on the Brad Holmes interview? You kind of thought it was a little bit more of a nothing burger, just like GM speak. I'm focused. I'm skipping meetings. I got to get this right. You want to put a bow on this, or you feel pretty good about where we're at?
I feel pretty good about where we're at.
All right. You have anything else you want to address on that?
I did think that Chris brought up like a little bit more of a concern from Brad. Like, you brought up a little bit more of like, and I don't necessarily, I didn't see it as much because I saw a little bit more of that combative piece, but you're bringing in a little bit more of that idea that some of that combative piece came from more of a need to get it right, or a need to tighten down the hatches and not let things leak.
Yeah, I think he's trying to go back to his roots a little bit and just say, hey, there's been a lot of noise, a lot of stuff, but I want to go back to what I've been good at, and I think he's concentrating on that.
And I think he's, like, you look at it early on, he's really good. And I know that early on this offseason, there was some debate right now on whether Brad Holmes was a better scout or he was a better GM. And I think right now, like, be the best scout you can be, because this is the time to be that scout. So,
and there's people to help with the GM side.
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot of resources there. I mean, getting the draft right really goes a long way, right? And I don't feel like he's mismanaged the cap either. Like,
No.
He's been a pretty good cap manager as well. there's been a couple free agent signings, or there's been a couple draft picks that haven't gone perfect, but look through every GM's closet, and they're going to have a couple misfits outfits that they've donated right away to the local Goodwill, and that's just the way it works, right? That being said, let's kind of transition.
Okay.
The way we set this up, I'm actually going to switch it up a little bit. I'd like to get into talking a little bit about the first round, what we're seeing as far as potential. So, again, I'm going to run through the first round a little bit, and I'm going to talk about what we're expecting and what are some other options out there, right? And some of these are going to be quick. And then what I want from you guys is I want you guys to just say, like, hey, like, I want you to interrupt where there's a guy that you think potentially, could fall in the Lions' lap, or I want you to let me know when there's a guy that potentially, if he gets drafted, previous to that number 17 number, that this is a really good thing for the Lions. Mm-hmm. And then I'm going to even go past the Lions' kind of projected pick, and there's a few guys there that obviously, like, these are all mock drafts. They're all completely inaccurate. That would be really good if he got steamed up or if there was a run on a certain position group.
Sure.
And let's just kind of dissect round one and not go as hard on the picks that are pretty far away and locked in that are not going to be in the Lions territory.
Okay.
That sound fine?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So 101, it's pretty consensus that Fernando Mendoza's going to go to the Raiders, right? And that's really where the consensus stops. Yeah. Which is going to be why next Thursday is going to be a lot of fun to watch, right? Like, because I'm going to talk about number two, and honestly, the number two, I've seen less than 50% of the mocks right now. It's Arvell Reese from Ohio State. I can see the Jets going David Bailey probably more often on mock drafts than that.
Mm-hmm. And you look at Aaron Glenn and taking over that defense and what he wants to work with, and what we've seen as Detroit fans from that. And David Bailey might be a better fit for his type of defensive scheme. So.
And David Bailey's probably a little bit of a safer pick, right? Arvell Reese is, for a guy like Glenn, like, he might as well swing for the fences because I feel like he's a sacrificial lamb in New York anyways. But so you go to the next pick, Arizona Cardinals take David Bailey. Other really good options is Maui Oga, Spencer Fanu. They need offensive line help. And this is a really, like, they're going to take probably a DN or a tackle. Both positions that the Lions could use, and they're going to kind of eat up one of those spots, right?
Yep.
We go to the Titans here. The Titans, it's all over the place. You got a guy like Sonny Styles sitting out there, but in this, they go Jeremiah Love.
And that's a good question mark, too. I would love that they take that running back at that spot, too, because, again, allows one of those better players to drop down the board a little bit. So
no doubt. So you go to the Giants. All over the board. Consensus right now is Sonny Styles. In this case, the Giants, Mansour Delane, who is a really, really good cornerback, potentially a lockdown cornerback. It's pretty high to take a cornerback. Lions fans, we have a PTSD from taking cornerbacks in the top five. But this, cornerbacks coming off the board early and often is a very good sign for the Detroit Lions. Go to 106. Sonny Styles coming off the board. In this case, we kind of mocked a trade where the Cowboys move up. But Sonny Styles really probably it's got to be a top 6 player. Mm-hmm. If something doesn't happen there, somebody's going to move up.
And he's a game changer. He's one of those guys that if he's anywhere near that 11, 12, 13 mark, would the Lions be willing to move up to grab him, or does he fit that scheme? It doesn't matter at that point. You make a scheme to fit him, as he's one of those kind of players. So.
Yeah. 107, you get into another DN, Ruben Bain Jr. out of Miami.
Love him.
A game wrecker. But, somebody that we as Lions fans don't think we're going to have the ability to draft anyways. Yep. Other guys, the consensus, if you look at mocks, Caleb Downs is kind of right there.
Yep.
And then you go to 108, the Saints. The Saints would love Jeremiah Love to fall to this spot, get their new Alvin Kamara. Jermon McCoy, cornerback out of Tennessee. So you're starting to see here in this particular mock that there potentially is a little bit of a run on cornerbacks, which is good.
Yeah.
because then you start steaming cornerbacks up a little bit closer. Other options here, would be like a Carnell Tate or something, or a Caleb Downs. That's 108. 109, Kansas City Chiefs taking Caleb Downs. They would love potentially Ruben Bain fall into them, Amawiaga fall into them. Heck, they're, with Travis Kelce being old, they might even like a Kenyon Sadiq sitting in the spot, which would also be a really good thing in this case. Caleb Downs, who's a guy that safeties don't typically get. They're the guys that fall and fall and fall. And we talked about it as Lions fans that this guy, potentially because everybody's so reluctant to take a safety, could be an option for Detroit.
Yeah.
So we start getting into this gray area right now.
Yep, and Caleb Downs, is not one of those positions of value. But if he is a Brad Holmes guy, if he is a Dan Campbell guy, then he doesn't care about the position of value at that point, right? So
yeah, so Downs off the board. The Bengals at 110. Keldrick Falk, D end out of Auburn. Again, a guy that's been all over the board on these mock drafts. I mean, I've seen him getting drafted, mocked in the Lions territory.
Yep.
This would be an interesting one. Good player. They need to replace a highly coveted DN. They need help on their defense. It makes a lot of sense.
And it's interesting because didn't they draft Shamar Stewart last year, did he at all pan out exactly the way that they were hoping for? Maybe. Still young, still developing, and still trying to figure things out. So
they also perpetually need O-tackle and
Yep.
O-line help. So
it
could hurt us too if we take either of those positions.
So they are a team that potentially kind of hurt the Lions a little bit because they need a lot though. I mean, you could see them going all over the board, and they're not a highly functional front office, right? Like they've got their issues, so they're a little bit of a wild card. Speaking of wild cards, we get to the 111 here, Miami Dolphins. They are going to struggle this year, and it doesn't matter who they pick. In this case, Mauioga falls to them, right? At 111. Yep. You can see him in certain mock drafts going at 4.
Got a big hole with Borum leaving.
Yep. They got Borum's a big hit for them. So they got to start somewhere right now, right? And you can see him go offensive line. I mean, down in South Beach, they seem to like the sexy flexy wide receiver or something like that. So you got a lot of guys on the board with Mekhi Lemon. You got.
And to be honest with you, that you might see a little bit more with a mobile quarterback. Now you might see the lack of skill positions that the Miami has right now. Let's cross our fingers and hope that a skill position falls off the board right there. So
in this particular case, they're not falling off the board yet, right?
Okay.
But it just takes one.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden you start getting a run because those wide receivers are all sitting there, right? So a tease, you go to 112 and Carnell Tate's off the board. And this was the Cleveland Browns trading back with the Dallas Cowboys earlier on in this particular mock draft, taking Carnell Tate, which is gonna kind of start the run on wide receivers. So the very next pick, you got Mekhi Lemon coming off the board. The Rams probably could use a wide receiver. They got an aging guy. They got a guy that Puka Nacua, who's turned into a little bit of a
diva.
Yeah, he's showing up on TMZ a little bit too often, right? You got to show up on ESPN a little bit too often, not TMZ. You got Stafford at the end of his career. Weaponize him as much as you can. Space that out. Give it one more run. They're a really well-run organization,
and they still have a pretty solid young defense that is still up and coming. So.
You go to 115, you got T.J. Parker. Beginning of the last year, T.J. Parker was a consensus top 6 NFL draft. Mm-hmm. Clemson, everybody on their team decided to poop the bed. Cade Klubnik was probably a top 10 quarterback coming into this draft. Yep. And it seemed like all those Clemson guys have fallen. T.J. Parker fallen a good 10 spots. He's mocked all over the place. He's a very highly talented guy. If he came out after his sophomore year, probably, getting mocked real early. In this case, I've seen him anywhere from 12 to 28.
Yeah.
Other options, there's a lot of other options in this spot. as we get to 116, we're getting close here. In this case, Cleveland Browns trade up, and they get Amon-Ra Freeling. They need offensive tackles. The Lions need it. The telegraph pass is out there. There's still a lot of guys on the board. Mm-hmm. This would hurt, right? As a Lions fan, you want all those options there. In this particular case, Freeling coming off the board as a prototypical left tackle would, play some hands here.
Well, but that it does allow us still quite a large cup worth of offensive tackles. There's still several of those edge players that are still available. Plus, a couple other of those those guys that maybe not as much of that position of value that are still on the board there. So,
well, speaking of a guy on the board that's been mocked anywhere from 7 all the way down to the Lions is Spencer Fanu, offensive tackle from Utah, a guy that can play outside, he can play inside. Elite athlete, could be he can go in there and compete with Larry Borum right away. Yeah, if he beats him out, he beats him out. If he doesn't, he competes with Christian Mahogany. If he beats him out, he beats him out. If he doesn't, he's a guy that flexes all over the offensive line and really could help the Lions out year one. And you kind of put him in permanent marker year 2 as a permanent fixture with the Detroit Lions.
That's fair, and that solves one of those tackle positions, here moving forward. The other tackle locked down by Penei Sewell. Tate Ratledge. You have Cade Mays for at least 2-3 years, and then your weak link then is Christian Mahogany or the depth behind him. To me, it's a solid pick, and going into that solves some issues.
So if you're still listening here, we're gonna go all the way to about 24 because I think that's kind of an area we want to focus on for some of these guys that the Lions potentially they're going to be around for the Lions, or the Lions could pick their guy, and then we're going to criticize this board a little bit and talk about some guys that can move up. So Vikings pick Cade McDonald, defensive tackle out of Ohio State. That would be great. Actually, if Cade McDonald goes 16 or above,
you're right.
That's really good for the Lions. Another guy that'd be, I don't know, the Lions could use a safety. But Dylan Thieneman out of Oregon to the Panthers at 119. Again, a guy that's talked about right in that range, could go above, could go below. I don't think the Lions are going to reach for a safety back there. If a Caleb Downs falls, they might be intrigued by that. But I don't think they're going to fall in love with a particular safety that's a back end of the first round guy. Getting to 20, Peter Woods out of Clemson.
Tackle.
Get to 21, Vega Leone.
And
interior offensive lineman out of Penn State. And I'll let Brian talk here.
Intriguing pick right here. So because the Lions do have a need at offensive tackle. We talked a little bit about how Brad Holmes talked, how Larry Borum has starting caliber starts already under his belt, that he could still be a starter going into the 2026 season. And maybe our weakness is a Christian Mahogany at left guard, and a guy like Vega coming in and being able to start from day one, not miss a beat. Put him next to a Penei Sewell, who we move from right to left tackle. Put him next to a Cade Mays, who's an upgrade from Graham Glasgow. Put him next to a Tate Ratledge, who is in year 2 and going to be a mauler. That looks scary. And so you look at a weakness at right tackle with Larry Borum, who still has some starting experience. Man, those 4 guys across the O-line do change the game a little bit.
Would be a very, very intriguing pick for the Lions. And I think let's go back and let's get into that in a little bit. I'm going to quickly kind of round out, a few other guys. The interior offensive lineman out of Texas A&M, Chase Bisontis, probably slaughtered that last name, to the Chargers, a guy that could be on the radar as well. Sure. Interior offensive lineman. Eagles go. Another name that's really difficult to pronounce. Arizona State offensive tackle, Max EO Anchor, I believe. But so I think, that middle round, right around the line, sponsored a run on some of these interior, exterior offensive linemen. And then you got guys on the board like Omar Cooper, Malachi Lawrence. You kind of rounding out the KC Concepcion, CJ Allen, Kenyon Sadiq. Those are all guys that are still on the board, and we haven't even talked about Caleb Lamu, who hasn't been picked, and then who's the Blake Miller out of Clemson. Guys that are still haven't been mocked, and Blake Miller's kind of consensus like 130 area. So lots of really intriguing options. In my opinion, if those wide receivers, they all got to go.
They got to go early. And to be honest with you, you might see the Miamis, like we said a little bit ago, take somebody, maybe even, earlier on, being able to get some of those guys off the board to allow the Lions to have their pick of again, alignment, need, as well as best player available. So rooting interest right now. If you hear KC Concepcion's name called before 17, that's a really, really good sign. If you hear Omar Cooper's name called before 17, if you hear CJ Allen's name called, if you hear Kenyon Sadiq's name called, those are all guys that you should be. Emmanuel McNeil-Warren, who actually would be a really Brad Holmes-esque safety out of Toledo. The dude is just a absolute brawler, and I don't know if Toledo is like DBU these days, but what they're putting out is unbelievable. That would be great. Also, a guy like Ty Simpson. Yeah. Quarterbacks get steamed up. We never want to believe that these guys are getting taken, but you nail a quarterback in the first round, you get the 5 years on them. You secure your GM spot for another extra couple years. Those are names that we want to root for getting pushed up. Is there any other names that you hear? And then let's break down kind of Brian's crush next, and kind of what your top few guys that you're really hoping that fall. No, I mean, again, I want the Lions to be able to have their pick of the guys that they've evaluated and have moved up their board. I'm very interested to see what the Lions have as first round caliber players and how they've rated them, because I know that in 2023 they talked about how they were able to get 4 first-round caliber players in the first 2 rounds. I'm intrigued to see what their synopsis is on those first-round caliber players. So
yeah, I mean, I agree with them. They got 4 first-round caliber players. Yeah. I think last year they got 2 first-round caliber players, right? Like
they got Tate Ratledge and they got Tyleik Williams, and Tyleik Williams, I think, was going to have a showing after we didn't need him to have all of the pressure on him in year one. And I think that now, having learned from DJ Reader and Roy Lopez and having a healthy Aleem McNeil next to him, and I think that those all are going to be things that are going to help him become even a better player and show his true worth as a first rounder. So
kind of reminds me a little bit of the Jack Campbell. Like we didn't need you to like absolutely shine year one, but man, year 2, here you go.
Yeah,
right? And I think you could see a big step forward.
And that's fair. And I think we talked a little bit about this off the pod too, is guys that we may see Brad fall in love with that we as evaluators don't necessarily see. The Blake Millers might be one of those guys that, might not be the sexy pick. It might be guys that are being mocked in the mid-20s, but at 17, that might be very appealing to Brad, saying, "Hey, this is a high floor guy that we can plug in at right tackle right away to compete with Larry Borum, and right away he might be moving ahead, right?" So just a guy that is almost Taylor Decker-esque on the right side, right? So just consistent for 10 years. So yeah, that might be a good pick for him. Those not necessarily as sexy picks that we might not have the Proctors or the Freeling name to them, but that just might fit the grit that the Lions are looking for.
And that name, Blake Miller, was a name that you guys both independently came in talking about being a Brad Holmes-esque pick. Is there any other names that are out there that you're kind of thinking in that range that could be a Brad Holmes-esque pick?
My crush, and I've already spoken to it a little bit.
Are you going to reveal it now officially?
Oh, Big Iona is my crush. He is not necessarily the position of need that we all would mark as we need an edge or we need an offensive tackle in the first 2 rounds. But I think he does just the same to fill that need. I think that he is a guy that just fits all of the characteristics, the height, weight, speed, the mauler, all the things that you want in an interior offensive line. He's that guy for me, and he would be an amazing Lion.
Any crush on your end, or?
I'm surprised Blake Miller wasn't mentioned in a lot of these, but also I think McCoy kind of goes along with the Jamison Williams, like one of those guys that would be a lot higher had he not been injured. And that's a kind of a Brad Holmes specialty of like, hey, this is a top 10 talent. I'm getting him here. I might pull that trigger. So I just wouldn't be surprised.
Well, Gerard McCoy's been all over the board. I've seen him mocked. I've seen him mocked top 10. I've seen him falling in past 20. There is a high risk, high reward with a guy like that, and to your
Holmes
point,
doesn't care about that.
He doesn't care. He doesn't care about that at all. So, and there's guys out there like Ruben Bain could be a guy that drops. I mean, this is to me, this is one of the most fun drafts I see coming up, and I'm so intrigued to go into here and come to you live. Next Thursday on YouTube, based on Brian's technology, and just be there to be so wrong on this because this is after one, it's a very open draft board. There's tiers. There's 10 guys getting drafted 2 to 12, right?
Right. And don't be surprised if 17 is not the pick, right? That's what we may be saying. Hey, these are the guys that might fall to us, but we all know Brad Holmes isn't a guy that waits around too long for his guys, right? He goes out and gets them, and he spends to get them, right? So if he has a first-round grade, a guy that he thinks is going to be somebody who is a football player that's going to fit the grit, that's going to fit the character, that's going to fit the need, he's going to go up and get him.
So rooting guide, Casey Concepcion.
Yes.
Ty Simpson.
Please, before 17.
Omar Cooper.
Okay. Any guy tagged with a wide receiver next to it.
I mean, Kenyon Sadiq. But, Chris, you talked about,
Wouldn't be mad.
That would be, the Lions' offense would just have to be they would have to outpace everybody, right? You're basically saying, we're just going to outscore you if you put your eggs in a tight end basket, especially a super athletic tight end basket.
It's a salary cap play, though, too.
Yep, and we talked about this as well. We need to get some sort of return at some point for a Sam Laporta if you're going to make that pick. So,
other names that could potentially you want to root for, and maybe some of these names we can talk about as we get into Brian's kind of round 2 synopsis of what potentially is going to be around for the Lions and what they can target in round 2. So, Brian, do you want to get into a little bit of your deep dive?
Sure.
Round 2.
The Lions right now in round 2 are picking around at 50, and we do not have a third-round pick. So, ultimately, at that 17 and that 50 pick, we need to get 2 starters. 2 guys that are going to contribute. Let's get away from starter. 2 guys are going to contribute in this year's roster that are going to compete for spots, that are going to add to this team in some way, shape, or form. And what does that look like? I know we've talked in depth that it needs to be O-tackle edge, right? O-tackle edge. What does that look like when it gets down to 50? What's going to be available at those 2 spots at O-tackle edge? A couple guys that I looked at least at those 2 spots, are Gettings Dunker, Iowa, tackle. I know he's talked a little bit about being able to be versatile, move interior as well. But that's, I think, a guy that could be that right side tackle and develop, compete.
You got Borum for a year.
And you got Borum for a year, but Dunker might be that guy for next year, right? So
Lions go safety. They surprise you. They go tight end. They go DN. They do something different, and then that's a guy that they could target in the second round to really kind of fill that role.
Absolutely. Another guy, Zion Young, and I know that there's some baggage that comes around with him.
Still a captain.
But still a captain. Still a guy that has production, has some experience in starts. Somebody that I think would fit very, very well across from Hutch. It's just whether they're willing to add somebody with a wrap on his sheet, and that's come up a little bit as well. Malachi Lawrence is a guy out of LSU that also could fit that edge role again. And then you look at Moore from Michigan, Derek Moore, who, again, it might be a pretty good fit. Not necessarily the height, weight, speed guy that the Detroit Lions are going to typically go across from Hutch. He's not going to be the biggest of edge setters, but ultimately a good versatile player that, in round 2 could be productive. So,
I mean, a national champion.
Yeah.
What about Michigan's linebacker that was Russian cover guy?
What about Michigan's linebacker that was a Russian cover guy?
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with the linebacker there. I mean, Derek Moore.
are you talking about Jayshon Barham?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
So Barham is an intriguing prospect. That he pretty much exclusively played D end.
Yep.
His senior year, came to Michigan as an inside linebacker, moved to outside linebacker, and then moved to edge. I mean, all the talent in the world. I mean, he's a 6'4" guy. That's a guy that you potentially
Derek
get.
Barnes isn't going to work out. You're going to have to find a guy there.
He tested well. Like, there's a lot there. Right now, he's a guy that's looking probably as a third rounder or a late second, which the Lions aren't going to be sitting there. But Jayshon, if you talk about who the Michigan defensive coordinator highlighted every year last year and said, "Hey, we're building our defense around that guy," it was Jayshon. Derek Moore was a old school throwback.
Yep.
DN, edge setter, could rush the passer, but Jayshon was the game wrecker that the other teams were probably advanced scouting a lot more. So that's a good point.
And probably somebody that's going to be fit more the role or fit more of what Brad Holmes has looked for in the past is Gabe Jackus out of Illinois. He does fit that bigger style, rush edge that can set an edge as well. So I just think that he's 6'3", 260, 280, big. He's going to be one of those guys that fits that role a little bit better for across from Hutch. But then you have to ask your questions. There's also guys like linebackers that might fit a decent role there. The guy out of Texas, the guy out of Texas Tech, so Jacob Rodriguez or Anthony Hill, who are both guys that could fill in for Alex Anzalone or Derek Barnes, depending on where you want to shift those guys. And those guys might be fits too. So
yeah, lots of intrigue, and it's going to be determined a lot on that first round pick.
Yep.
And there's still going to be best players available, but they need to get a plug and play producer right there. So, Brian, kind of rough segue here, but did Bill have any input on kind of pre-draft notes or?
We were chatting a little bit about still wanting edge, still wanting offensive tackle. Not trusting guys like DJ Warnham or Larry Barham to be the guy, but I think Bill has also mentioned Vega as a guy that he really does enjoy. He thinks that he could fill in a good role and make us better. But I still think that this draft we could use at least 2 guys, and we got to get it right. We got to get it right. So
Yeah. Any other thoughts here on before we sign into kind of the Michigan Sports Corner? All right, so let's talk a little bit about kind of Michigan Sports Corner. The Red Wings completely pooped the bed over the last couple of months. Very, very sad to see. And they weren't going to be a team that was going to compete for a Stanley Cup this year. But potentially they're going to be a team that just broke the glass ceiling on getting back into the playoffs.
Would have made the playoffs in other years.
Yeah.
Consolation prize.
Potentially. So if you look, to your point, at historical context, they are one of the highest point-getting teams in the history of the NHL to not make the playoffs. So there's a couple consolation trophies for the Red Wings, but pretty disappointing end of the year.
But they were also in January leading. So I mean, you can't lose 2/3 of your games down the stretch. So
Larkin going down, but
Larkin went down. And the worst thing here is the Red Wings. They made a trade at the end of the year, and they traded away their first-round pick this year, unprotected. Unprotected. And if you know the Red Wings at all, and maybe this is boring to you, but the Red Wings have had the worst lottery luck in the NHL for year after year after year.
This year.
If they get lottery luck this year and they have the unprotected traded pick, we're all going to be really sad. I might do a whole podcast where I cry. All right? The Pistons, 60-win season, playoff bound. Yeah.
Sunday.
Coming Sunday, number 1 seed in the East. This is a pretty exciting time for the Pistons. Cade's back.
Pistons lost Cade. They kept going. Red Wings lost Larkin.
Did not.
Pistons are a wagon. Speaking of wagons, Detroit Tigers.
Let's go. 6 in a row.
6 in a row. They blew a 6-run lead today.
Got it
back. Came back in a a Crohn's-related couple delays during the game with the umpire kind of subbing out. There's a rain delay. A lot of weirdness going on. But you want to see your team win some of these types of games. We've seen a lot of 2-1 wins and 3-2 wins, and that's not necessarily the way you want. You don't want to have to trust your starter to get you 6 with giving up 1 and your bullpen to give up 1 over the next couple of. You want your guys to hit and hit in clutch situations, and they were down and out in the 9th inning, and they had a Riley Green 2-run scoring hit with 2 outs in the 9th. And that's a really good sign.
Huge.
Gritty tags.
Get back into the gritty tags.
Yeah, I don't have any MSU updates.
Why not?
Nothing happened.
I got a good U of M update, though. They did win the national championship in basketball, so that was kind of cool.
It's kind of.
First Big Ten national championship since the year 2000, which is a little bit surprising. We think of the Big Ten as being a pretty elite basketball conference. So, the Spartans with Mateen Cleaves were the last team that Mo Peterson, kind of that Flint dynamic that won a national championship. And the Wolverines, I think start to finish were the best team in college basketball. To me, as a Michigan basketball fan, it was almost more of a relief than a celebration, because it was all right, they were always the best team, and they finally kind of capitalized on that. Anything else that you want to kind of stab into here? Do you
McGonagall.
McGonagall. Future Hall of Famer. Signs that early deal. He gets $150. Interesting, the Tigers didn't give Torque the early bag, Dingler the early bag, Riley Green the early bag, Casey Mize the early bag. They gave it to McGonagall.
McGonagall right now, already 69 at-bats right now, best hitter on the team. Best hitter on the team. 21 years old.
One of my favorite parts of McGonagall did a press conference, and in the background is the Tiger team. Yeah. And Scooble's sitting next to Verlander, and Verlander looks like his dad, and he's just kind of chuckling. But Scooble said, "Hey, man, this weekend we got back-to-back day games, and good opportunity for the team to go out to dinner. Do you have any plans to buy dinner for the team? And Kevin said,
"We'll figure that out."
Said he will, and you know what? He's going to be probably buying better bourbon than what I have on my shelf that night, and that's going to be a lot of fun.
Also, first time he wore a suit in his life.
Was it the first time he wore a suit in his life?
Yep.
Wow.
Confirmed, I think Cody. But yeah, he said he rented a tux before for prom, but first time he actually wore a suit. 21 years old.
21 years old.
50.
Oh, to be 21 again.
I mean, also, for the record, there's a lot of first time. First time he was legally able to, like, show his ID and buy alcohol, right? Like, I mean, you know, he's not married, so he hasn't had the first time with a woman yet, you know? So, like, a lot going on. Yeah, a lot going on. So, sow your oats, kid. Anything else that you want to talk? So tease next week a little bit. Is this legit? Are we going down?
This is the plan. This is the plan. So stay tuned. We are going to go live for the draft. We're going to be here in Rob's basement. A crew of us are going to be around, and we're going to just be able to check in with you guys. And you know, as the picks come in, we'll give our reaction. So
yeah. Anything else you want to talk about next week? You're going to be here?
Oh, I'll be here.
Okay. So, you know, I'd like to give a quick shout out to Chris Alone, who has been sitting in the background, been feeding us notes, putting them on tees, putting big old yellow softballs on tees, letting us hit us out in the park. He's going to be a weekly contributor on the podcast, kind of going forward.
Let's go.
Big draft guy, big numbers guy. He'll be, you know, there in the chat if you need to ask any questions, but we're kind of excited to have him. And Brian typically banter a little bit more, and that'll come in time.
It will.
But super excited to kind of expand the pod and get more voices on here, more opinions, because mine isn't good enough. So
yeah, and we'll dive into the DeAndre Levy and Sue debate. So we'll get into it.
All right, we are already deep enough here, so we are going to sign off. So stay gritty, go Lions. See you in the draft, baby.